In this tutorial, I'm going to use curves and surfaces to create geometry, NURBS geometry in particular. So I'm in the curve shelf, and I'm going to create a Bezier curve. And I use the grid as a guideline, and in the front viewport, I can left mouse click and let it go. That creates a corner point. And when I click and drag, it gives me the Bezier point, which has a handle that controls the curvature of the curve. I need the first point and the last point to snap into x position 0 to prevent a hole from happening after I revolve this curve. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. And we can further edit the curvature in the profile view. So once I've done that, I can then use the revolve tool on the shelf under surface shelf, or you can go to find in the surface menu. Once you do that, initially you'll see it black because it's reversed. All you have to do is go to edit NURBS and reverse surface direction. At this point, we can further edit the 3D shape using the curve. By turning off the select surface object, I will be able to only select the curves. So then, because they're still connected, the curves in the 3D geometry, I can actually change the curves and it will affect the 3D shape simultaneously. This is a good way to further shape the 3D geometry. Before we go in more detail, and for the Bezier curve, you can use rotate, scale, move tool, just like how you would do with a 3D object. In this case, we're just moving the sub-object. Once we're happy at this stage, we can then go back to turn on the select surface object and further edit this 3D geometry without only editing the curve. Now we're not editing the curve at all. We're using the control vertex to further modify the shape to make it look more like an apple. And you always want to make sure when you select the CV doesn't select anything that you do not want. So it's a good idea to hit 4 to see the wireframe, just to see any unnecessary vertex or vertices are being selected. If they're being selected, you can hit Control and click on them to deselect them. We continue to use Control Vertex CV to edit the shape of this apple. If selecting one ring of vertices are not enough, we can always select more till we are happy with the shape. You can use move, select, rotate, scale tools all at once on multiple vertices. And then you kind of give it a big stroke of shaping this apple so it's kind of not so uniformed in all directions. It looks a little bit more random. In addition to the CVs, we can also use a hole to shape this apple further. It allows us to select the whole ring of CVs to shape with scale, move, etc. Okay, now we have something that looks much more like an apple, and then we can randomize the shape again, like using large stroke. You just select a bunch of vertices based on your profile, what you're looking at this apple. It needs to be a little bit more random here and there so it looks more organic. There's another apple. To be sure that our apples is now not being affected by the curve, the Bezier curve we created earlier. Right now it is connected still. We want to delete the history of this 3D geometry. Once we do that, as you can see, now the Bezier curve is not connected to the 3D mesh anymore. Now we're gonna use a different way of creating NURBS geometry by using a surface 3D shape directly, in this case a NURBS sphere. Know that every time we create a 3D mesh, NURBS, or polygon, we can always further edit it under the channel box. So in this case, under the input NURBS shapes one, we can control the radius, the sweep, linear as well as cubic. You can see what they do. Simultaneously, as I change these values, you can see them in the viewport. In this case, I'm going to model in orange, so I'm going to increase the sections to 12, a little bit more than 8. To create extra lines, instead of using the span control, I insert isopon. Click and drag existed isopon and towards where you want the new isopon to be. And then you go to edit NURBS and insert isopon. Now we have 2 extra isopons. Now I'm using the whole subobject tool and then pull these 2 sections that I just created downward to begin the shaping of my orange. Then I'm going to right click on the subobject of CV, control vertex, further randomize these shapes. Kind of like apple in this case. Just pull them up or down. Okay, now that starts looking like an orange. We do the same for the bottom vertex. And now we can start squashing, stretching. However, this orange needs to look a little bit more organic. Do the same thing on every angle as you look at this orange. It's a 3D object, so you make sure you don't look at only one side. You rotate around and do further editing at different angles as you look at this orange. And let me turn off the grid just to have a little less distraction looking at this orange from different angle. If I were to add a stamp onto, maybe not so much for this orange, but maybe for the apple, I can create a cylinder under the surface primitives and do a few adjustments under the inputs. And then go to Animation tab. Under the Animation menu, we have Create Deformer, Non-Linear. In this case, I'm using a flare to make one end of the cone a little wider than the other. And shape it further using curves. I can also use a deformer called Bend. Make sure we're selecting the whole object, of course. Use the curvature to bend it. Now there's a cute, interesting shape in a very few steps, and we just need to position it in place. I'm using this orange to give you an example, but this kind of look more like an apple stem. I also had created this shape that kind of try to make it look like the tomato stem. Okay, so to create this, I also use a cylinder, except I actually delete part of the default shape that cylinder gives me. To do that, we actually go to Outliner and take the cap out of the parent of this entire cylinder geometry. So we unparent it. So now you can see the cone and the bottom cap is one geometry. We delete that, and then we just need to leave this. And I create an extra isoplane and use CV to just pull the shape out wherever I need it to be, however you want to shape it. As long as there are enough curves, enough vertices, you can do so. And once you have a shape, you scale it and move it in place, and then you can easily make either a tomato or a persimmon out of a very similar shape to an orange or an apple.